So here we are in the beginning of September 2022, and I think it's very realistic to expect that Russell Westbrook's NBA career is basically over. And that's a pretty crazy statement to make given the fact that he's been in some really high-profile trades over the last couple of seasons, teams giving up significant assets to acquire him. And this time last year, going into the season, a lot of people thought that the Lakers adding Russell Westbrook and the star power that provided was going to put them back into real legitimate championship contention. However, for a variety of different reasons, I really do think that Russ might just be done. And it's weird because it's not necessarily that he's really bad. Like, there are worse aging superstar players in the league that are gonna probably stick around longer than Russell Westbrook. Like, Carmelo Anthony might be in the league longer than Russell Westbrook. There are guys out there that are worse players overall, but because of Russ and who he is, this might just be kind of it. So let's just recap this for a little bit in terms of the reputation and the perspective on Russell Westbrook. So when he ended up in Washington, I was kind of out. Like, they started the year, they weren't any good. Obviously, they had injury issues and everybody was dealing with weird stuff. But I basically, I would watch those games and I would think, okay, we know who Russ is now. He's had multiple different chances to try and change who he is alongside Harden in Houston, obviously alongside KD. This is who he is. Russell Westbrook, even right now, I believe this. If you put Russ on Charlotte or Orlando and you let Russ be Russ, you let him be MVP in Oklahoma City Russ, you're going to win like 42 games. Like, that's going to happen. And I think if you close your eyes and you just throw him on a basketball team that has some pretty good NBA players on it, you're going to win 40 plus games. That's who Russ is. But then when he got to Washington, I was like, okay, but that's all he is, because plenty of players throughout the history of the league that were stars and end up going into the second half of their career or the later stages of their career still could have been that guy. Like, there were points in which, like, Allen Iverson still could have been that guy despite, really breaking down physically. But when you get to that point, Melo is a great example. At a certain point, you have to adapt. Like, if Melo just had a lifetime NBA contract and he was allowed to be on an NBA team for the next 10 seasons, and you just said, hey, Melo, we just want you to score. He can score 20 points a game without question. If you just want him to go out there and score 20 a game, he can do it. And if you just want Russ to be on your team, he'll win you 40 games. Like, that's going to happen. He's going to go out there and play incredibly hard. He's going to really not pay attention on defense, but he's going to create points for himself, for others. He's going to rebound the ball, and he's going to provide energy every single night. You're going to win 40, 42 basketball games. But unfortunately, the thing that he hasn't been able to figure out is that Melo, that Vince Carter type transition where it's like, okay, I'm not the 50-55 win game guy anymore. I'm not the number one guy. I'm not the MVP guy. That's not who I am. I've had too many injuries. I've had that burden for too long. I'm too old, and my skill set is not developed in a way that allows me to continue to be that guy at an advanced age the same way it has, for example, for guys like Chris Paul. Like, that's just not who I am. Now it's time to transition into being a guy that commits defensively, that cuts off the ball, that learns how to play off the ball alongside one of the greatest on-ball players of all time in LeBron and an incredible defensive big in Anthony Davis. There's a recipe here for Russell Westbrook to make this work, and he continues to refuse to do it. And as a result, I'm not convinced that like 2 seasons from now, Russell Westbrook is going to be on an NBA roster. And that's weird because I think talent-wise and I think physically and in terms of what he wants to do, he's very much still a very good NBA player. Like, I'm not a Russ guy at all. Like, I don't like watching him play. I don't think that he helps the Lakers. I didn't think at the time that they made the trade that it was a good trade. I put out a video immediately after it happened that they lost the deal, that it was not an intelligent decision. They should have done the Buddy Hield thing. We've talked about that a million times. I'm not a Russ guy, but I will openly admit that he's still a very good NBA player. Like, he can still get to the rim. He can still create shots for other players. And if you just were able to flip a switch on him and say, hey, tone down the craziness a little bit, quit turning the ball over. We don't need you to shoot a ton of long twos. Here's what we need. Learn how to play off the ball, cut, run the second unit, create shots when LeBron's not on the floor, play well alongside Anthony Davis, and guard. Do those 5 things, and Russell Westbrook is a helpful and a productive NBA player. The problem is we've gotten to the point where he's had so many chances and so many opportunities to fill that role and specifically fill that void on this Lakers team that it's just never going to happen. He's not comfortable with it. He doesn't believe he's at that point in his career, and he's been there for 2 years and he's refused to do it. And so my question is, if you're one of the other 29 teams across the league and tomorrow Russell Westbrook just gets cut from the Lakers, they're like, this is not going to work. We added Pat Bev, who's going to be an off-ball guy that's going to guard and shoot. Russ is just going to be in the way. It's just going to be a toxic situation. We're just going to cut him. If the Lakers cut Russell Westbrook tomorrow, tell me the team that's signing Russell Westbrook. Just tell me the team that is like, you know what? I think this is a good idea to bring this guy in. You might initially think, okay, well, it's the teams you mentioned earlier, Tuck, that are going to win 40 or 42 games with him. Charlotte, Orlando, Indiana, whatever the case may be. There are teams out there that are going to want to add Russell Westbrook. Okay, but why? why. If Orlando is going to be good this year, like if they're going to win 40 games, they want it to be because Paolo learns how to be the primary guy and is initiating things offensively, and Franz is awesome, and the young guys are growing there. And if Charlotte's going to, for some reason, be good, they want it to be because LaMelo takes a leap offensively and continues to grow and develop. Those things aren't going to happen with Russell Westbrook there, because if he goes to Orlando or Charlotte or Indiana, he's going to think he's the guy. The only thing that you could potentially make an argument for Russell Westbrook all of a sudden figuring out that he's not the guy is because LeBron is on the roster. If he goes and plays alongside LaMelo or Paolo, he's immediately going to be like, oh, this is my team, and he's going to drag them to 40 or 42 wins. And that's not what you want to be. If you're going to be good, it's going to be because the young guys grow. And if you're going to be bad, you want to be really bad. Like, you want to have another top 5 pick. There's no in between. And that's where Russell Westbrook exists. He exists in that in between area where he hasn't learned how to be a complementary option on a team that wins 55 games, but he also is going to be good enough still that he can carry you to a 40 or a 42 win season. And so I don't know the answer to that question. Like, Russell Westbrook is still good enough to be a good NBA player if he puts himself in the correct situation and the correct mindset. But I don't know who the team is that, if he gets released or if he has the same season this year that he did last year, that's going to sign him to a significant contract next off season. And I know that there are situations where it could work. Like, maybe you're Miami and you're like, we don't really have a lot of options to improve our team. If we can get Russ for free this year, or we can sign him to the mid-level next year, that just gives us another piece, another option, and maybe we can get through to Russ. But there's already been so many teams that have tried to be the team that are going to get through to Russ, whether it be Houston, whether it be Washington, whether it be now LA. If you want to try and be the 4th team in a row to try and change Russ away from MVP OKC type Russ, go ahead. But I don't think there's going to be that many teams that are going to be excited to do that. Now, having said all those things, is there like a 2% possibility that Russ is good this year and he learns how to do the 5 things that I mentioned earlier, and LeBron is healthy and Anthony Davis is healthy, and those guys just get some time on the court together and everything's fine? And the only reason it didn't work last year was because nobody was healthy. They couldn't build that chemistry, and Russ didn't know where he fit. There were nights where he was the guy because LeBron wasn't playing and AD was hurt. Then he had to go back to being not the guy when those guys were healthy, and they couldn't figure it out. Is there a 2% possibility that that's the case? Russ is good this year. He re-signs with the Lakers or gets a big contract somewhere else, and he's back to being Russ again. Yes, there's a 2% possibility that that's the case, but you're working with the assumption that the only time this hasn't worked is last year's Lakers team. He was pretty good in Washington. Like, he carried that team at certain points. He was pretty good at times in Houston, despite the fact they had to change the entire roster to fit around him because he couldn't shoot the basketball. But the idea for Russ moving forward in terms of being a piece that people actually want on their team is to change how he plays. Like, the example of Washington doesn't matter because he didn't change. Like, he still was Russ. The example in Houston doesn't matter. It's not relevant because he didn't change. He still was who he was, and the team changed around him because he was incapable of change himself. And so unless Russ is suddenly a 38% off-ball 3-point shooter this year, and he becomes a guy that doesn't need the basketball in his hands every time down the floor and can actually move off the ball, we don't have evidence, despite multiple opportunities for change and in situations, I would argue, that would have made those basketball teams better had he decided to change. There's no examples that we have that it's going to happen. And so that's why it's 2%. Like, that's why it's such a small amount. And I really think, and I know that Russ has some very passionate fans out there that maybe think that it's all LeBron's fault, it's all the Lakers' fault. He hasn't been put in a position to succeed. He's one of the best players in the league still. I know that he has some passionate fans, and I've made negative Russ videos in the past and people always get mad at me, but I don't know who the team is. If you can go around the league and you can point out a team right now that if Russell Westbrook was available would give him $10 million a year for 2 seasons. If you can find that team, then I'll start to listen to an argument that his career isn't actually ending. But like, it's not San Antonio. They're trying to be bad. It's not Utah. They're definitely trying to be bad. If Indiana or Utah traded for Russ, they're cutting him immediately. Like, they would just do it to get the Lakers draft picks. I don't know what the team is. There's no contending team that needs what Russ provides as the player that he is and has been for the last couple of seasons. And there's no indication that he's going to change. And there's no bad or average team that would either benefit from adding Russ to their roster in terms of winning more games in a way they'd like to win, or that doesn't want to have to deal with the fact that he's going to actually make them better than they really want to be. 10 years ago, when everybody was trying to win basketball games all the time, Russ still would have had a spot. But in the new tanking era that we're in, and the fact that there's going to be a ton of teams that want to get in on the Wembanyama sweepstakes, there's just no team for him. And so unless he makes it work in LA this year and everybody's healthy and everybody's happy, and that somehow magically is the problem is solved, the riddle is solved, there's no team for Russ, and as a result, there's really no place for him in the league. Now, I've laid out this whole argument. I spent this whole time talking about it, but of course, I'm interested in what you have to say. If you have counterpoints, if you have an argument against this, I want to hear it, because when I go through it in my head, when I talk to other people, I've yet to hear an argument that makes me think, hey, maybe this isn't actually the end. Maybe Russ can figure this out. Maybe there are examples where he's done that. If you have that argument, please leave it down in the comments and I will read it. I'm really intrigued by this because I think he would probably be the best player in league history to just be without a team, specifically because he refuses to transition into a new era of his career. I hope he figures it out. I want Russ in the league, but I'm not sure he's going to be.